don't even have the words to express the gratitude for the amount of support that was given into that. That was something that was started even way before I made it to the NFL. Something that was started small just to be able to affect my small community back at home, McKees Rocks. I just wanted to be able to play my role and do my part in my community as I ventured off and to chase my dreams of making the NFL. And you guys have just took that and blown it away, and I'm so excited for the things that I have planned in the future for these kids all across the country now. While I'm so thankful to everybody, I know that it isn't enough just to be thankful. This is just the beginning of the impact that I wanted to have on the world, and with God's guidance, I will continue to do wonderful and great things. I couldn't do this without any of the support and the love, and I can't wait to continue to take y'all on this journey with me.
Okay,
so
that's the voice of Damar Hamlin.
Right, that was the voice of Damar Hamlin. And so the first thing that we need to remind people is that we live in McKees Rocks, and also Damar Hamlin is alive.
Yeah,
he's not dead.
He's not dead.
And we'll explain why. And unfortunately, it doesn't have anything to do with a vaccine. It doesn't have anything to do with a heart attack. It doesn't have anything to do with anything health related at all. Damar Hamlin and the heart attack story, or the story of him becoming injured, is just that. It's a story. Mm-hmm. It's theater. What's the real story is what we're going to talk about.
Right. Yeah. And just to qualify, we're not from McKees Rocks. We moved here. And so we're seeing these things from a different perspective. We're seeing them from, first of all, we are artists and commentators. And so we critique things from our point of view. But, in this case, we moved here about 4 or 5 years ago.
4 years ago.
Yeah, 4 years ago. And so we have an outside perspective that a lot of locals may not. So that's probably, good and bad, I suppose. But,
I think the story here is, as you always say, the simplest answer is always the correct one.
Right.
And just like with the COVID story, where my original thought before masking became a mandatory thing or a suggested thing for the country, my original thought was the correct one, which is that this is a military operation. Mm-hmm. Okay, and we've since discovered 3 years later that I was right, that we were right from the beginning.
That the COVID story is a military operation.
Is a military operation. And so what this should tell you is that your first thought about things is your intuition kicking in, and it's almost always correct. But because of society, because of capitalism, because of the fact that people have agendas at play where there's lots of money at stake, you have been bred through your institutional education, through your church. You have been bred to ignore your intuition, and we're headed back into that intuitive space regarding the Damar Hamlin story, and we're sticking to our guns, and we're saying we are correct in that this doesn't have anything to do with health. This doesn't have anything to do with the shot. It doesn't have anything to do with vaccines. This has to do with opportunity zones, impact investment, and foundations making lots and lots of money. And the cover for all of this money that's being made, which is ultimately a slush fund, which is a fraudulent way to hide money or make money, the cover for that story, for that fraud, is an injury of a football player.
Right.
Okay.
And I think the word you were looking for is like enculturation.
Okay.
Like enculturated. So like through media, through schools, through institutions, through whatever, and through just like socializing, right? We've all been enculturated into this idea that, like what you were saying, that we should trust the authorities, and we should also believe the stories that are being told to us. Right.
Right.
And I think that the point I was going to make is that we all have been like led to believe that this was a real thing, and my first take on
the fall.
The fall. That's a good way of putting it. The fall
Damar's
it was at first I thought, well, this is a way for the NFL to contribute to the lie about the athletes collapsing on fields,
right?
Because of the shot, and everybody was pointing to the shots, right? To the weapons, the bioweapons that have been distributed throughout the world. And these athletes dying and falling over on the field, and they said, "Oh no, it's not the shots." I mean, they went out of their way to do that.
Of course,
right? It was a heart attack through rough play, basically. Through we've had generations of football players get injured, and ultimately they're like the brain damage that came out of all that, and the NFL didn't want to do jack shit about that until it was like brought forward and popularized, and that could have even been a psyop for all I know. But they didn't want to do jack shit about injuries and brain damage and that until a certain point, until they were shamed to do it, and now they're like, oh yeah, football players, because of the the impact to their bodies, experience heart attacks. That's the same lie that says, oh, children have always had heart attacks. Didn't you know that? That's bullshit. And all of this is bullshit. Right. It's a complete psyop, right? But it goes even farther, even deeper. And
it does. And you notice that after the Damar Hamlin fall, we haven't seen any athletes falling over on social media. Mm-hmm. So I even have to ask ask you out there who've been fully aware and paying attention to all these athletes just falling down, like, are you sure that you were seeing something even real then? I think what's really real is what you have to see outside your front door.
Mm-hmm. Be
careful that social media doesn't convince you of things that aren't true.
Right. So let's get into that in a second. But I just want to say is, you just cannot trust anything in media,
ever.
Even us. Look us up.
Yeah,
but
it's so.
We come from a place. We come from a perspective of intuition, and we do hypothesize and speculate. So we're going to say that right up front, that we are not investigative journalists, and we don't check our sources, but we do look at sources, and we don't go through the rigorous checking
whatever
that a journalist would, because that's
rabbit holes,
right, and that because that's not who we are. So we admit that we're speculating, but we use what we see in culture, what we see in news sources, what we see, and try to put it together in a fashion that makes sense logically, that can that follows a story. Because this whole like we were saying in our bookmark podcast the other day, this whole COVID thing, I kept asking why, and we finally, it took us 3 years, and we
went back to the original intuition, which was that it was a military operation, right. And then somebody who did all of the research and followed the laws and followed the rehoming of biological weaponry into the HHS. So the DoD-backed biological weaponry has been rehomed and rebranded into Health and Human Services. That confirms our suspicion. And that's not something that fact checkers can even argue with. A lot of people are coming back to us and saying, why is your most popular video essay called Living War Crimes, the new Constitution, Living War Crimes? Why is it allowed to stay on YouTube? And the only thing that I can answer to that is it's because it's all fact. It's all based in fact.
Right.
This is something that, if people at YouTube are looking to verify the things that we have said in that video, they will find verification of it. And you can't argue with it.
Right.
You can't argue with the law.
Or
the law is working against you.
And you featured all the websites that had the actual information that you were using, right?
Yeah.
So
then there was one source site that you can go to, and it's called Bailiwick News.
Right. But even like the DoD and all these other places, they always tell you what they're doing.
Always.
It's just that it's hidden in plain sight.
Right.
Right.
One of the reasons that we we're holding on to this Damar Hamlin psyop. One of the reasons that we're holding on to it so hard is because we actually do have a better position to share what's really going on in this story than anybody else out there. Because 1, we live in McKees Rocks. 2, we have become friends with and actually interviewed, and we were part of the goal for Sean Gibson's foundation and the mixed-use facility that he wanted to open up in McKees Rocks under the Josh Gibson Foundation, who was a legendary ball player here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We're friends with his great-grandson, Sean. So you have to ask yourself, where is that mixed-use facility in McKees Rocks?
Right. So let's get into that.
Yeah.
And there's another thing that I want to point on, touch on, and that is the guy that put out the lie about Damar Hamlin being dead and saying that he looked it up and all that. So let's get into that in a second.
Exactly.
But I also want to point out that the other reason, number 3, that we're hanging on to this Damar Hamlin story so hard is because it also fits in to the content that we talk about, and that is of impact investment, opportunity zones, and the exploitation of communities, marginal communities, and communities that are at risk, as they call them, or poor communities, if you want to be less politically correct. And so this fits right in because it's the exploitation of the goodwill of people, as well as the exploitation of the poor.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about Sean Gibson. So we met Sean because he wanted to. He had this idea to build a facility in the town of McKees Rocks, in the borough of McKees Rocks, that would benefit all children, but especially children who had disabilities.
Especially children who had disabilities, right?
You want to tell them what he's about?
Well, so Sean Gibson is the great-grandson of legendary ball player Josh Gibson, and Josh Gibson was considered he's considered the black
Babe Ruth.
Babe Ruth,
right?
So,
and he even excelled at football too. So he chose to go into baseball, but he could have played almost anything. He was a consummate athlete. He was an athlete,
a consummate athlete. So one of the things that when the Damar Hamlin story came up, and the first thing that I did before I became emotional about seeing him fall on I think it was January 3rd at that at the game that everybody was watching, I immediately went to his foundation and I thought, okay, so he's from McKees Rocks and he has a nonprofit. Well, Sean Gibson has a nonprofit, and although he's not from McKees Rocks, he wanted to actually open up an actual facility where you would have disabled children would have an opportunity to play sports and get physical exercise and be part of community, which growing up with an autoimmune illness in California, one of the best things for me was being able to engage in physical activity with other children. So this could have really helped the disabled community, and it would have helped the community of poverty that is McKees Rocks.
And directly, yeah.
Absolutely directly, or indirectly. Directly and indirectly.
Yeah.
So everybody would have benefited from this. And so we went to the town council meeting and listened as everybody voted it down. And basically ran Sean Gibson out of town. And he was shocked. We were shocked. It was a terrible thing to witness, to watch this community of color and community of poverty turn against one of their own, a Pittsburgher who'd done so much for the city,
right,
and has such a legendary position here. It was devastating to watch this,
right,
and so it started to. We started to ask questions. Why?
Yeah. Let me just point out that he may not have grown up in McKees Rocks,
but he grew up in Pittsburgh.
Literally just across the border in Carrick, which is like a stone's throw from McKees Rocks,
McKees
right? So he had friends in this area. He grew up in this area,
here.
so he grew up in this part of West Pittsburgh, okay, the West End of Pittsburgh, so he had roots here. Right. So he had, he didn't have a claim, but he, so yeah. And let's point out that, and I keep saying that, but that this is a stark contrast between a nonprofit that's trying to build something in a community that will directly benefit the people in the community, as well as, Pittsburgh area and Allegheny County, people of color, disabled community, children of all kinds. And the reason that it was a good place was it was an area that wasn't being used. It was a field that could have been used.
Yeah, it was just an empty field that he wanted to build on. It would have been perfect.
It was near a bus line that had flat ground, which is unusual in Pittsburgh, okay, because it's a very hilly area. That would have been perfect for, for wheelchair access.
Wheelchair access, exactly.
Bus access, okay. But it had a serious NIMBY,
NIMBY means not in my backyard. Not in my backyard.
And literally, there was a woman who was
literally did that.
Yeah.
At the meeting that we attended.
And she came up with every fucking excuse possible. Now, the contrast is that this new foundation, the Chasing M's Foundation, Chasing Millions, is not trying to build something in the community, is not trying to directly impact, well, it's going to impact, but it's not directly benefiting the people in this community. It's benefiting
investors,
yeah.
slush funds,
yeah.
racketeering and fraud, under the guise of a story that leads with your emotions, as opposed to leads with your pragmatic, practical, informational knowledge about what an impact investor does in an opportunity zone. The reason that Sean Gibson's foundation could not build the mixed-use facility in McKees Rocks is because McKees Rocks is a labeled opportunity zone, and opportunity zones don't exist to benefit the community. Opportunity zones exist for one reason, and that is to hide investments, use nonprofits and various other foundations or NGOs as a way to hide their millions or even billions of dollars. If Sean Gibson were to have built the Mixed Use Foundation for the benefit of the community, it would directly affect investors. They would lose money on the fraud that is an opportunity zone. That's why it never went forward. And Damar Hamlin is your sympathetic face plastered on the front of fraud. You take away his face, and it will be nothing but fraud behind it.
Right. Well, let me bring up. He could have taken money from impact investors. I'm sorry, Sean Gibson could have taken money from impact investors. It could have been a mechanism for impact investment. And we'll get into what impact investment is in a moment. But the thing is though, that it would only go so far. And the whole point of impact investment is to make sure that it keeps going, and that the investments in that, whatever it is, that community or that thing.
Zone.
Well, an opportunity zone is something else, but it's similar.
You hide the money.
Right. Well, an impact investment would continue going, and it's there to reach certain measured goals. But what I'm trying to say is once the type of organization that Sean Gibson was running didn't allow for that continued exploitation, because it's not an organization about exploitation. It's an organization about actually benefiting, right? Okay.
And providing a service.
Right.
Okay.
Now,
so what I want to say is I believe, that opportunity zones, which were created during the Trump administration
by billionaires in Silicon Valley.
It was Sean Parker, the Napster fraudster. Okay, I don't know if you know the story about Napster. He's the one that said, "Yeah, I love opportunity zones. I get to hide my money there." He pretty much came out in the open and said that opportunity zones were a fraudulent way for the billionaire class to hide money. I believe that as this evolution of human capital markets, which is another way, which is a pretty way of basically modern day slavery, my interpretation of the evolution of human capital markets is that impact investors, which were once a separate thing from opportunity zones, are now working hand in hand with opportunity zones, which are government established. They were established by the government. Ben Carson actually came to McKees Rocks. Remember Ben Carson, the Secretary of Housing, I believe, during the Trump administration? He actually came to McKees Rocks and brazenly and happily announced to everybody's delight that, McKees Rocks is an established designated opportunity zone. And JP and I went, oh my God, do these people not understand that this simply means that their community will be required to remain poor and blighted, and something like benign neglect will have to take place in order for the funding to keep rolling in and covering what you call the impact investors.
Right.
Impact investors are part of the private capitalism, private sector. So when you have the private sector working with the government sector, like opportunity zones, and they work together and they have handshake deals to continue to hide their money, that's fascism. So McKees Rocks is lifting up fascism, okay, when you've got these two types of things working together. And in order to put a pretty bow on it and, turn your shit sandwich into a lobster dinner, they have to put a pretty face on the front of it, and that pretty face is Damar Hamlin. Okay?
Right. So we talked a little bit about opportunity zones in our bookmark from Saturday, January 28th. So you can go back and find that, and we talk about that there. We also talk about impact investment in the video essay called Lifelong Learning. Okay, but what, in a nutshell, an impact investment is it's an outside private investment that is focusing on something that benefits a community or
it claims
I know.
Well, be careful, like you have to say,
it claims that it benefits like a cohort, like a group of people, or
a
children,
community
or whatever,
a daycare center.
Okay, and what it's about is it they're measured goals, and they have specific things that make it happen. Now, it takes money from government, and it takes money from investors, and it creates this mechanism of investment that is supposed to be doing good, making the world a better place, kind of thing, right? Anytime you hear that, making the world a better place, just pay attention to what's
or if you hear the word impact,
right? Impact, yeah,
or
exactly.
Or even words like touching the community.
Yeah.
Which is what Damar Hamlin said.
Right, and he just said. And he said impact, too.
Yeah.
And so what it is it's a situation that then pays for, this thing that's supposed to be doing good. But what happens is that it also creates the opportunity to start exploiting that very thing that they're trying to fix. And so if it's worth it to them to continue the immiseration of the community or the cohort, in order to continue making money from it, that's what will happen with that impact investment. And that's, I'm sure, what's going on now. Impact investment is a great way to hide exploitation.
Exactly.
Then you combine that with the number of nonprofits that are in this community, in McKees Rocks. The nonprofit industrial complex is running rampant in this community, as well as the impact. There's that word again, but the actual impact that Section 8 housing has had on this community. Mm-hmm. McKees Rocks has the most Section 8 housing in the Allegheny County, as and most likely the state of Pennsylvania. Now, saying that, I don't mean that we shouldn't have poor people in our community. We shouldn't have Section 8 housing. What I'm saying is that it hasn't been distributed evenly like it normally would be, right? It's all been concentrated here. And why? Well, this is a perfect, it's
a designated opportunity zone.
Exactly. So. Well, it became that designated opportunity zone over time. Mm-hmm. But I think that was the first step in getting this town, because it has always been sort of under the heel of
Yeah.
the ruling class and the
mob.
the mob. Well, the mob literally it was
Literally,
over there.
I
Yeah,
know.
the mob did run this town for a while there, and so these things have all played into the fact that this town has always been a place of exploitation.
Right.
An exploitation of workers, an exploitation of goodwill, an exploitation of people and their immiseration. There's so much recovery of addiction going on here and addicted people here because there's so much trauma here from over the years of, like what I was saying, exploitation and rule, I guess,
So let's talk about, there are people who actually truly believe that, that Hamlin is a saint. And then there are and he's alive and well. And then there are people that believe that he is dead.
Yeah.
So let's talk about where he went to school. Like we went out and had dinner with our friend Zig last night, who talked about the school that Damar Hamlin went to. Mm-hmm. So why don't you tell us? And because you used to be a bus driver,
right,
and you used to drop kids off over there,
right? So
why don't you tell us what that school is really like?
So the school is Pittsburgh Central. It's Pittsburgh Catholic Central,
yeah.
Right? And it's a very well funded Catholic school, high school.
It's where rich people go to school.
Yeah, and so basically the ruling class of Pittsburgh and Allegheny County pretty much all go to this one school.
The ruling class.
The ruling class.
This is where Damar Hamlin went to school. This does not represent McKees Rocks. All right, so right then and there, you should be able to say to yourself, wait a minute, he claims he's from this impoverished community outside of Pittsburgh, and yet he went to a school, he went to a private school where the ruling class attends? So that's interesting.
Well, so Central Catholic High School offers scholarships, merits-based aid scholarships, and most likely sports scholarships as well. And I have a feeling that he was able to get some sort of scholarship through his athletic ability because they have a strong football team,
sure.
and so their athletics are very strong in basketball and in football and everything. Right.
I'm going to push back against that a little bit and argue that I don't think Damar Hamlin is even that great of an athlete. So how did he get the scholarship?
Well, I don't know. All I can
because his mother is running a nonprofit in McKees Rocks.
It's not a nonprofit. It's a daycare
or a
center.
daycare center where I'm sorry, not a nonprofit, but a daycare center in McKees Rocks where she receives government funding in an opportunity zone as well as money from the people who need her services, and that this kind of institution, this Catholic Pittsburgh Central Catholic High School, is the kind of institution that molds and creates community leaders under the guise of a football scholarship. Okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I don't necessarily think it was his athletic prowess that got him the scholarship. Mm-hmm. Because if that's the case, then there's a lot of kids out here who are amazing athletes. Mm-hmm. How come they're not getting a scholarship?
Yeah. So
he was smaller.
Mm-hmm.
His weight didn't quite... He just is not a very athletic looking person if you really look at him. He was, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I can't really comment on that, but I can say that, when I was a school bus driver for about 3 years here in this area, I actually did have to take a couple kids out to Pittsburgh Central or Catholic Central, Central Catholic, and they were from McKees Rocks. Their normal bus driver called in sick, so I had to pick them up and take them out there. So the two boys, they were brothers, and they lived on our street just a few blocks up. And so I picked them up and took them, and they looked very much like kids that were being groomed for power or corporate lives and being put into that track of being the managerial class. Okay?
Shall I say who these kids look like?
No,
or
you
shall
don't need to. No,
Okay.
I don't need to say that because
Okay.
I don't need to say that.
Okay, that's fine.
But they looked groomed. They looked like they were being put into the track for the managerial class.
Exactly.
And whatever, that's fine. Get them out of the the hood, whatever. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that is the type of students that go there, and the alumni are both in the ruling and managerial classes, right? And it was a pathway that allowed him to go to Pitt, University of Pittsburgh,
Damar,
Damar, which is just like around the corner from this high school. Literally, it is just around the corner from this high school.
Right.
And so all of this takes place in Pittsburgh. Now, I have a feeling, and I think I'm correct in saying this based on our conversation with Zig, is that the former mayor Peduto went to Catholic Central Catholic, because his sister, I believe, was the one that closed all the Catholic schools in Allegheny County because she was like in charge of the Catholic schools district in the diocese here in Allegheny County.
I see.
That when the COVID fraud took place, she was the one that closed all the Catholic schools.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
there's that connection with the Catholic Church. Well, I'm not gonna say this kind of like conspiratorial, kind of like, oh, the Catholic Church, blah blah blah, because I grew up Catholic. So I'm just I'm gonna say is that there goes there's a lot of power in these older cities. Even San Francisco still has some of that legacy, even though that's been kind of washed out through just like because it's not a city like Pittsburgh where people stick around and like families have been here for hundreds of years. San Francisco is a transient city, so there's only a few families that have been around for a long time.
Right.
So the Catholic Church doesn't have the same role it has in some of these other cities like here or Boston.
Right.
Okay, but so the power is there, and it's centralized in some of these institutions like Central Catholic High School.
Right. I want to focus on the man himself. I want to focus on Damar Hamlin himself. Is he in on the fraud, or is he a useful idiot? And has he been programmed? And is he been psyoped himself into believing that he had a heart attack? Do you believe the heart attack story at all?
No, I don't.
No.
So we speculated, when it first happened, it didn't look like a completely like a fake fall. Like oh, I faked falling over. It didn't look like that to me, but it also didn't look like these athletes falling on the field, like just falling flat, or like
we'd
that
seen,
or like that comedian who fell on stage after she bragged about taking the shots,
and she cracked her skull.
Right,
she fractured her skull.
Right, it wasn't that, and I was like, well, it could have been some voice to skull technology that like knocked him out,
or it could have been
it could have been anything.
Could have been dosed and got dizzy and fell over. We thought that maybe we were speculated some of that, but sometimes all of that gets in the way of the simplest answer.
Right.
And the simplest answer is that money talks. Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, he's part of the scam. He's part of the racketeering and the fraud that gets committed regularly in opportunity zones.
And I will say,
I believe,
like you said, useful idiot. So he could, again, speculation. It could be that, yes, he is part of it, but unwittingly knowing, unwitting part of it, meaning that he could have been convinced, hey, we're going to do this thing, or it could have been after he fell, so he may have been targeted by the NFL or the DOD via the NFL. We know who this kid is. He has this background, blah 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 blah. He will work with us if we sell him the story right.
Right.
So they knock him out somehow, and they because I've been built up like this before in the corporate world.
Sure, of course.
They'll go,
they'll build you up and then knock you down.
Exactly. That's what I'm trying to say. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Right.
Is that this was probably something along those lines.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm actually on board with that. So he was probably legitimately something toxic happened to him. He didn't just have a random heart attack. Maybe he was dosed. Maybe there was some sort of technology that knocked him over and made him dizzy. And then we were sold that he had a heart attack. When really what it was is he just got a little bit dizzy and fell over. And then when he woke up after being, out probably just for like an hour or two, they said, "Oh my God, you had a heart attack. You can't ever play football again. But
here's what we're going to do.
We're going to Colin Kaepernick you.
Yeah, basically.
We're going to turn you into an image. And that image is going to talk about going out there and outreaching to your community and telling people how much you love the community, especially the community of McKees Rocks, the Opportunity Zone. And you're going to be the front puppet for all of this good work, right?" And he's like, "Okay, that's fine. I will cut my losses. I don't have a football career. I was a little small anyway for the NFL. I hadn't really been in any legitimate, strong position on the field anyway. He was a
safety.
He was a safety. Whatever. I'm sure it's a necessary part of the game.
Yeah, well, neither of us are football fans, so we don't know.
Low man on the totem pole in the football.
Well, sure. I mean, because he was a rookie, right?
Okay, he was only a rookie. He's probably having his handlers, his mother, his family members, his image makers, his coach, the NFL spokesperson, all standing around his bedside saying, "Man, you're the greatest thing that ever happened. We're so sorry you can't play football anymore. Don't worry, you're still going to get a salary." Because if you remember when I looked at how they actually went, and he had a contract, and he said, "Should I become injured in the contract, I will get a certain percentage of my salary." They went against his own contract and still gave him a full salary.
Right.
A full salary.
Right.
So
it's $3 million a year, right?
Yeah,
or
I forget
for the length of the contract, or whatever it was.
What the contract was, but the fact is that traditionally, in every situation, when a football player is injured, his contract says, it's something like 30% of my salary, which is still really great money considering they make millions of dollars a year.
Yeah.
But for him, they gave him the full salary, not just the 30% or whatever it is.
And how often does a football injury, or a person who gets injured on the field, how often do they get lifted up like this? How often does such a big deal get made out of something like this? Zero. Exactly. So it's a hinky thing all the way around, which allows us to speculate because we know that we're not being told the full story or the complete truth, and so it's very problematic to get this story and try to swallow it whole, because it just feels wrong from the beginning to the end.
Right. And just a couple of days ago, just so that you guys know, a Los Angeles Charger.
They moved. Okay.
Oh, hang on. Lemonier. So the guy's name is Lemonier. I love the names, Lemon.
Right.
Who knows if this story is true. But in another report of a sudden and unexpected death of a healthy younger person, Jesse Lemonier, a professional football player, has died. He was 25 years old. So he was, number 52.
On the Chargers.
And I know it says he played for the Los Angeles Chargers and the Detroit Lions in 2021.
Oh, okay.
So it doesn't say if he played at all in 2022. Probably not. If he was feeling poorly because of maybe taking a bioweapon.
Right.
Thinking he was getting a COVID shot.
So when did he die?
He died a couple days ago.
But he didn't die on the field.
No, he died.
Okay.
So, I'm just trying to say that why aren't we hearing foundations being made in his name?
Right.
Why isn't the NFL gathering his family together and placing his parents as
Right.
the front of a foundation? Like, you know what I'm saying?
No, because here we have the miracle story, right? He fainted on he collapsed on the field. He had a heart
attack is what they're saying.
I know, he had a heart attack as a result of getting hit too hard, blah, blah, blah. And now he's recovered dramatically. He's had this dramatic recovery, and everybody, and so when you see a campaign, and this has been a campaign where people start wearing a certain color, where lights are lit all throughout the country, if not the world.
Yes.
In buffalo blue,
right.
And these symbols and these phrases, especially the specific phrasing that gets put out there. This is an organized campaign, and it's very similar to the pinpoint accuracy of the COVID campaign, which came out of the DoD. And so when you have these kinds of accurate campaigns where people are, arm in arm and lockstep with a particular message.
It's a militarized effort to psychologically manipulate your emotions and your thoughts around this. You have to remain logical. You have to use your brain and skeptical.
Right.
And use your intuition. Skepticism, intuition, and logic.
Yeah.
Is where you have to go. You have to set aside your emotions and set aside your sentimentality.
And speaking of sentimentality, I mean, he's also adopted this sort of heart symbol that people do with their hands, right? With their two hands, and they make like a heart, right?
Sure.
Shape, right?
Yeah.
And
it's so sad because that's such an innocent symbol.
Right, but it's been exploited, like everything else. It's getting exploited and used in this campaign. So you have hand signs, you have messaging, you have colors, you have ritual.
And you have sentimentality.
And
all wrapped up in this gooey, squishy story about this alleged McKees Rocks hero.
Right.
Who didn't even attend
the McKees Rocks High School.
The McKees Rocks High School.
Stowe Rocks High School, which we can see from our window, our front window.
Yeah. So I think that now I want to talk about something that you have brought up, if you don't mind, that I really feel there's something there. And I think that I want to really go there. I want to really get deep into it. You talked about the vetting or the searching.
Sure.
And when you said that, my brain immediately went into the tables that used to be set up in my high school in the late 1980s, where you would have military people scouting for young blood. And they would scout in poorer communities on purpose in order to bring the meat bodies out to the field so that the military could justify their expenses.
And their existence.
So take it away, because I think that's where we are with this Pittsburgh Central Catholic going out there and looking for potential bodies to represent.
Interesting. So
okay.
Yeah.
So
I don't know if he went to Stowe Rocks, grade school or middle school. I don't, because I don't know. I didn't follow that down too much. But
plus we've only lived here for 4 years.
Yeah.
So
he we moved here when he got into Pitt.
Right.
And so I want to start with, the military and the draft. The draft kind of stopped. I mean, it's still there. It's still in effect. You still have to register, but they stopped really drafting people to go to war.
Right.
Okay. So the campaigns that we've been involved in, the two Gulf Wars and Afghanistan and all these other things, there's no draft. Why? Well, because they go into communities of poverty in order to recruit. And they've been deliberately, economic policies like NAFTA have decimated many communities throughout the United States. Well, why is that? Well, I suppose part of it is that, they can control people. And if they can control people and make them desperate enough, they will do things like join the military in order to, make some money, right? Or have some sort of career or get out of their poor community. And so, this just reeks of exploitation. Now, that's a little different than what we're talking about with maybe say this Central Catholic high school. But I think it's the same idea where, when we talk about inclusivity and these kind of programs that are in the corporate world where they hire people of color, and it's the idea of identity politics kind of ruling
Equity.
and equity, right? And where it's more about, what you are, not who you are. This allows for easy labeling and saying, look, see, we're being equitable. We're hiring people of color. Well, they're people of color of a certain class. They're not necessarily poor people that come from the community that we're the neighborhood that we're living in, unless they find somebody that maybe stands out a little bit academically, stands out a little bit more athletically, or whatever, has connections somehow, right? And so they can recruit people, especially people of color, to kind of promote this idea of equity, of identity politics and inclusivity. It's along the lines of like what we were talking about, that one CEO of that company, and I can't remember the name of it, but we did a breakdown of the bio economy.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
And
my
she
God,
said we have people of color, like 100% people of color at the C level.
At the C level
of our
corporate.
right, and that's basically the CEO, the CFO, the C,
right. So
right,
it's not like
the
regular.
C-suite.
Right, the C-suite. So none of those people were poor to begin with.
No, they were all like upper middle class or
They
whatever.
they had better opportunity than I did.
Right, exactly. So
Yeah.
so it's this false claim
Right.
of inclusivity and of equity, right?
Right.
And so you've got to start somewhere. So you start grooming people that fit maybe a look, they fit a type or whatever, and they bring them into a more mainstream kind of education tract, and
They put them on a pathway to
success,
to the managerial class.
right? Which allows
Right.
So I don't know if I got into like what you were referring to. So why don't you
Okay, so I
backfill?
believe. So let me just pare it down into it based on what you said, which I thought was brilliant, and based on my intuition regarding the recruitment of soldiers for the military. I think what you have here is Pittsburgh Central Catholic is seeking out certain faces and personalities to bring into their community of privilege, and then groom them to become representations or spokespeople for the billionaire class. And billionaires only exist, let's just get this out there, okay? And let's just make this very clear. Billionaires do not exist because they have extra special talent. Billionaires exist because the money was inherited to them, or they exist because they are exploiting the poor. That's it. They either inherited it from their families or their fathers who exploited the poor or exploited resources.
Right.
Or if they themselves grew up either middle or lower middle class or poor, they were put on a pathway to exploit the
Right.
poor.
They certainly didn't lift them up by their own bootstraps.
Right. There is no such thing as lifting yourself up by your own bootstraps. That does not exist. All right, so let's just get out there. So the billionaires at Central Catholic High School are looking for someone in a community that is underprivileged to represent their interests. They would like to continue to exploit the world for their profit and enter Damar Hamlin. His mother is a go-getter. All right. There is no two ways about it. She will sell her own child for millions of dollars, for $2, $3, $4, $7, $8 million, however much money the Chasing M's Foundation raised. Okay. So from the beginning, she was like, I do not want my kid in this community of poverty. I'm going to do whatever it takes.
There's something laudable about that.
I'm going to do whatever. And I have no problem with that. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get my kid into a better situation. I don't want him involved in drugs. I don't want him involved in gangs, whatever it takes. So she creates a daycare center, and she gets funded by the government, and she slowly starts to ingratiate herself into the community and also the larger Allegheny Pittsburgh community, and suddenly she is noticed by somebody like Central Catholic. They go to her and say, we want to bring Damar into our world, and she says, great. Okay, there's kind of nothing wrong with that, but the reason Damar exists to this day, and the reason that his Chasing M's foundation blew up so badly, was for exploitive purposes. So in the same way that the military recruits young, strong 17, 18-year-olds to recruit them into a system that will actually cannibalize them and hurt them in the long run, is the same thought process.
Right. It's
we're
similar
going to
track,
recruit this individual. We're going to groom him and mold him to represent our interests. Now, this person, unlike going to war, Damar will receive a nice, paycheck. He'll receive a nice funding. He'll get sponsorships. His clothing brand will blow up. I mean, he will see the benefits of it, but nobody in McKees Rocks will.
Right.
McKees Rocks is actually the equivalent of the soldier that is being tricked by the military to go out there and use his body as cannon fodder in order to support the further funding of the military apparatus.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah. So it's pure exploitation.
Pure exploitation.
Of a community. And so, and to back this up, and this is something we've talked about before in our last footnote, we talked about Damar Hamlin.
Hopefully this will be the end of it.
Yeah, I think I'd like this to be the end of it.
Yes.
And that is that, most, the NFL players, the NBA players, the Major League Baseball players, all grew up as elite athletes, right? They grew up in a system that groomed them as athletes throughout their lives.
Right. We're talking about even when they're in grade school, they'll get sponsorships, to pay for their hockey skates or their
something like
football
that. Yeah,
gear or something.
Okay. So to kind of illustrate that, I was a swimmer in the 70s as a kid. And I didn't get sponsorship or anything like that, but there were back then it was the amateur athletic union, and that was the track that got you into like the Olympics, right? So you had the Junior Olympics, and then if you did really well, then you'd end up in the Olympics. Well, the only kids that really could like pursue that were kids that were of privilege that had money. Their families had some money. I knew a kid
could afford to send their kid,
right?
Like in your case, to private lessons and 8-hour, practices and stuff like that.
During the summertime, we would practice probably 5 hours a day.
Yeah.
And 2.5 in the morning, 2.5 in the evening.
Yeah.
There was a kid on my team who was one of those consummate athletes. He was an amazing swimmer, but he also was an excellent football player. I don't know whatever happened to him. There's another kid that his family did have means, and that I'm sure he continued on if he was good enough. He wasn't that great of a swimmer, so I don't know if he did well enough to continue into the Junior Olympics.
Right.
The kid who was the consummate athlete did make it to the Junior Olympics at one point, but I quit. I kind of lost track of all that. But my point is that, it's a lifetime of playing and grooming and playing in a specific level of athletics. And all these kids grow up and they know each other from playing each other on other teams. So to illustrate this further, I heard an interview with some members of the Cleveland Cavaliers, and they said this outright. Yeah. It's like, and they're a basketball team, for those of you who don't know. They said this. We know the guys that play on opposite teams. Because
we go way back. Right. Like we grew up together.
Exactly.
Right?
And
You've got the Golden State Warrior kid going, oh yeah, that's my buddy over there who plays for the Cleveland Cavs.
Right.
Yeah.
So
okay.
So you have
we go way back.
So even though they're young men of color, okay, they grew up in a situation where they were coming from the middle or upper middle class, mostly upper middle class families that could support that or find ways of funding it that did not break the bank for them.
Right.
It was part and parcel of their growing up. their family was able to truck them around to the practices and get them to school, and
right. They had the means to do that,
and the means to do that.
Nobody in McKees Rocks has the means to do that
exactly
for their kids.
Exactly.
So Damar didn't fit what you're
I'm
describing.
Saying is he didn't fit that mold.
He did not fit that mold.
So how does a person that comes from his background get into that track? Well, what you were talking about, you get recruited into the system to be a token. At the worst, okay. At the worst, a token of inclusivity and equity,
right?
But at the best, just a another sort of groomed individual who's brought in, and it's sort of like this Pygmalion kind of thing, right?
Right, exactly. So he was made into something. And again, I'll ask you again, now that we've gone through this, do you think that he's part of it? Do you think that he's part of this
I think inadvertently he is.
Yeah.
I think he's more of a useful idiot. That's a nasty way of saying it, but
I like this idea that I had where you have his groomers, his trainers, his parents, his coach. You've got representatives from the NFL. You've got media people all surrounding him saying, "Oh my God, you were a great football player. You had a heart attack. You can't play again, but no worries. You still have a career."
Mm-hmm. And you get built up through that kind of thing. And like we pointed out in the corporate world, I mean, that's how people get exploited or they make it, right?
Right.
They somebody, comes along and is their mentor and grooms them and gets them and builds them up, or opportunities are presented through, advancement within the ranks,
sure.
right?
Let's talk about his foundation for a bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then and then I want to end, before we finish up, I want to end with the bullshit around his death.
Right, the bullshit around his death, and I want to talk about the one good thing that may have come out of this.
Okay, all right. Okay. So what was the next thing you wanted to do?
I want to talk about his foundation.
Okay, let's talk about his
foundation. You found some information that was really good about Chasing Millions, which is the name of his foundation.
Right.
And there was some weirdness around that. So why don't you just talk about what you discovered?
Okay, so I was reading this article, and we don't have to read it. It's just that there was.
And the article is from a website called Sporting News.
And so the header is what is Damar Hamlin's charity? I'll just read this paragraph, okay? Mm-hmm. Hamlin established the Chasing M's Foundation to give back. This is from earlier this month in January, I think January 15th.
Right, it was a couple of weeks after he fell.
Hamlin established the Chasing M's Foundation to give back to children in his home community of Western Pennsylvania. Quote, as I embark on my journey to the NFL, I will never forget where I come from, and I am committed to using my platform to positively impact the community that raised me, he wrote on the foundation's GoFundMe page. I created the Chasing M's Foundation as a vehicle that will allow me to deliver that impact. There's that word.
Twice you hear the word. When you hear the word impact, people, that's not a good thing.
Right. Now
that should warn you.
Right. Now
this exploitation is taking place.
Right, exactly. And I think that honestly, this, because it was like this sort of backwater GoFundMe campaign that only made like a couple, maybe a couple grand, $2,500 that it really was kind of legit because it didn't really raise much money.
Right, it didn't raise much money at first.
Right, it wasn't until he got hurt or until he fell
that suddenly it was worth millions.
It went millions, and so there's a mention of that here in this article where he says. So before Hamlin's medical emergency on Monday, the foundation had raised a total of around $3,000.
Jesus.
As of January 6th, 2023, that amount now exceeds $7,900,000, and we know now that it's like in the
probably 10, 11 million at least.
Yeah, I don't know where it is now, but
it's way more.
There's
than
all this,
7.
and then all these like high level people in the NFL have been donating like tons and shit tons of money, like. Jim Isray of the Colts donated $25,003 because of his number 3, right? The Patriots donated $18,003. Rams donated $12,000. $10,000.
Let's break that down. Let's unpack
that's like
this.
so much money compared to what he.
Why are these people who represent these various NFL teams? Why are they donating to this foundation in an opportunity zone?
Right.
That's based out of an opportunity zone.
So this is clearly not charitable giving.
No.
This is about investing in something that will give back to them.
Right. Here's what I will speculate. Can I speculate
Please
for
do.
a minute?
Yeah.
These giant corporations that donated to this, what started out as a legitimate GoFundMe account or GoFundMe campaign, it started out legitimately and then was exploited. The corporations that donated, hundreds of thousands of dollars into it are making an investment and eventual into an opportunity zone they're making their impact investment into this opportunity zone with the understanding that their money is going to go to products and services that will chain and control the children, especially in this community, to be forced into systems. And those systems will then generate a profit supported by the government and supported by the military. And then that original investment that those corporations make, they will receive a return on their investment. Mm-hmm. So the Colts may have invested $10,000 into this opportunity zone through the fraud of a GoFundMe account, but they are going to see a $10 million return on that investment. Yeah. That GoFundMe account is cover for a return on investment. And the only people that will profit from those investments are Damar Hamlin and his family and the people who make the investments in the first place. They're going to see a big ass return on that. Meanwhile, the only way it works is if you exploit the people in the opportunity zone, the designated opportunity zone that is created to create this racketeering, fraud, and slush fund. Mm-hmm. Okay? I don't know how else to put this. This is not about a health crisis. No. This is not about a heart attack. This is not about whether he's dead or alive. He's very much alive, and he's very much a part of an ongoing scam called opportunity zones and impact investments.
Right, and so like we pointed out before, the programs that get set up as a result of these impact investments, these opportunity zones, the nonprofit industrial complex, is all about creating services for people who need them. But the services are set up to help them only so far in order to keep those people or people like them coming back for more.
Exactly.
So that the money can keep getting put into it, and the money gets, the investments get returned, and you have people that are employed now within this nonprofit, this NGO or whatever organization. So you have an economy that these people are making money from, and they may not even live in the community.
Of course they don't live in the community.
Right.
Even Damar's mother doesn't live in the community.
You don't think so?
No. God.
Well, she might live nearby, but yeah,
I
doubt she lives in West Park.
Come on. So this is why you can't have, if I was going to be sitting down and trying to, tell our friend Sean Gibson, this is why you weren't able to have your mixed use facility to help the community, because of what you just said.
Right. Because there's a lack of exploitation that goes on there. Exactly.
Yeah. You have to create an unending need, and that unending need has to be an immiseration, an investment into misery in order for these billionaires to make a profit. What Sean Gibson wanted to do was something good, was something really, really good that does not involve immiserating or causing misery. It lifts people up.
Right.
You can't have that in an opportunity zone.
Right, exactly. Then there was something else that I wanted to say about that.
You wanted to talk about his health, too, I know, before we close out. Yeah.
The other thing that you pointed out to me the other day, and this also goes along with this whole fraud, is that he is now being lifted up as sort of the spokesman of this foundation, right? It's not about selling clothing. But because he had a heart attack, there's going to now be an opportunity to make sure that all football players get, tested for their EKGs and all these
EKGs,
things, right?
right?
And so there's going to be all this equipment that's going to be bought and sold, right? In order to support this, right? So when you have mass shootings, it allows for people to say, "Oh my God, we need to put metal detectors in a given location," right?
At church.
And so ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, everywhere. So the best way...
It's the same kind of idea, right?
Exactly.
So you create this need, this fake need for something, because football players now have heart attacks.
Apparently. So the best, and we've seen this before. We saw it with Colin Kaepernick.
Right.
Once, the story of Colin Kaepernick is that he's number 7 for the San Francisco 49ers. And during the national anthem, he sat down on the bench. He did not take a knee. People forget that.
Right.
He sat down on the bench. Colin Kaepernick was kind of small for a football player. And a lot of people, when this whole thing was happening, where he sat down during the national anthem and everybody was upset and all this stuff, only a few people were like, he's not actually very big for a football player. Like, what's he doing on the NFL to begin with,
and he
right?
He could have played baseball. So why is,
Yeah, so what's going on there? So Colin Kaepernick probably was told, hey, look, we have this problem with racism in our country. And, how do you feel about that? He's like, well, I think that's a terrible thing. He's probably a private conversation with his image maker, with his handler, with members of the NFL, with, lawyers, who knows? Maybe local, maybe somebody from the ACLU came and talked to him,
Yeah, exactly. Or even BLM, right?
Had a private meeting with him.
Right.
And said, we have this problem. And so they buttered him up and got him to a point where he was like, yeah, we have a racism problem in our country. So I'm going to sit down during the national anthem because the national anthem is all about,
Right. Supporting racism.
Racism. Which we agree with, know. So...
Or something like that,
So he sits down, and what happens after that? Suddenly, out of nowhere, you've got social movement organizations like Black Lives Matter. Suddenly you have terminology like running rampant through corporate America that says we need to equalize our demographic we need equity in our hiring, we need to be inclusive. Suddenly everything changed in corporate America, right?
Yeah. Practically overnight.
So Colin Kaepernick was the pivot point for a social movement or a social organization that ran rampant through our communities. Okay, that's what we're witnessing with Damar Hamlin, is another pivot point, another pivot into the way that the NFL and possibly the entire sports franchise operates now from this point forward. Like you mentioned that I had said, and thank you for bringing it up again, which is maybe now if you are considered, someone who is going to be not inducted, but is going to be brought into the NFL, maybe now you have to go through regular EKGs or regular physicals,
Right. Well, I'm sure they have to do that anyway.
You have to do that anyway.
It's just a new level of it.
It's a new level of it.
Right.
It'll be a deeper level. Like they're going to check your heart.
Right.
They're going to check your blood. Like all this stuff.
Well, yeah.
And it impacts the medical community. And it gives rise to the medical community saying, oh my God, how are we going to meet this new need that the entire sports industrial complex is going to need us to meet this need? Help us, government. And so there you have the DOD saying, no problem. Or the government saying, no problem. Here's everything you need.
Right.
This is a deployment of a service that you think you need, and I'm telling you, the way that the United States has operated for hundreds of years as a military outpost We are now turning inward, and all of the money that the DoD would normally spend and normally need from the government to go and blow up brown countries, they're now turning into a medical facility to take all those trillions of dollars and turn it into making us a big giant hospital in the United States.
Well, and that dovetails with what we were talking about, like with what Catherine Watt is talking about, what we've been talking about, and that this is now one of the key areas that we will all be funneled into and exploited over, or financialized through. That's a better way of putting it. Financialized through medicine, through debt, through a number of other things we've mentioned before. And so that dovetails right in with what you're talking about, how health is now being used as a way to make money from the people all over the world.
Exactly. Right. And so we're gonna go ahead and close out now, but I want to.
Do you want to talk about the lie, the bullshit about his death, real quick?
Oh, right.
So
yes.
Before we close out, let's talk about that, and then we can talk about the
who benefits. Who benefited from this entire fraud,
right?
This entire story, this entire theater. Who benefited? But first, let's talk about this horrible Twitter person, Greg Gervais is his name, who put this
stupid fucking video
out talking about how he can prove that Damar Hamlin is dead. Damar Hamlin is not dead. He is alive and well, and he's very wealthy. Okay? He is now the spokesperson for impact investment in opportunity zones. Okay? That's who he is now. Just like Colin Kaepernick is the spokesperson for social movement impacts. Okay, like I just said. So this gentleman, this guy, Greg Gervais, this Twitter account. Yeah, I know, right? This Twitter account, Greg Gervais, is trying to convince people that Damar Hamlin is dead when he's not. And he's basically saying, see here, I've got his name and his mother's name and his age and the fact that he lives in McKees Rocks to prove that he's dead. And the fact is you can go to the site he went to, which was a Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania records site, and you can type in all of that information, and it pops up. He's taking screenshots of information that he himself typed into the database, and then using that to try to prove to you that it's some kind of death certificate.
Right. And it wasn't.
And it's not a death certificate.
Yeah, and it was, and it was the death records. So all he was doing was a request for records for this person.
Exactly.
And all he was showing you was the content that he input, and then
in order to get the record.
Right. So it was he put it in, and he got the results back. So he was showing the results page before you go to the next screen to request that
they had died.
Yeah, or the record of the death.
The record of
the
death.
But he didn't show the record of the death. He
just showed the
database.
Where you input the database. So this is this is another aspect of exploitation which I want to touch on very quickly. This entire Damar Hamlin story came on the heels of so many people who know that the COVID shot is actually a bioweapon. Deployed by the Department of Defense. And they have good intentions in wanting to make sure that people know this and that people stop injecting themselves. And if they have already, to go and seek care, really good care that could hopefully reverse the damage. They have these doctors, these researchers, these people have really good intentions. They have been watching for an entire year, video after video after video of athletes falling flat down and dying in the middle of the game. They're terrified, they're upset, I get it. And then suddenly they see on national TV, Damar Hamlin falls down in the same way, and they think, oh my God, this is finally it. We're finally going to see something come out. It's going to stop. There will be justice served. And so these people see this Twitter announcement that Damar Hamlin is really dead, and they don't realize that those sincere emotions that they have are being exploited once again.
Right.
By this Greg Gervais guy. He is a terrible person for doing this.
Right. Because he's just doing it for his own benefit.
He's doing it for his own benefit. He put horrible, like, music to it to try to
he should
rile
be arrested
up,
just for that.
Yeah, right, exactly, to try to rile up your emotions. I mean, he's just one of the most insidious people in this whole process, you know, for exploiting doctors who have been doing really good research, you know, throughout this entire process. And I want, you know, people to lead with logic and lead with understanding the mechanisms that are behind this entire thing and our life right now. And once they understand, you know, once they see the gears turning behind the scenes, it will suspend their sentimentality. It'll suspend their emotion.
Yeah.
You know, and this guy is just nothing but an exploiter.
Right. Now, you know, when we say logic, we're not saying, you know, don't ignore your intuition.
Right.
You know, don't allow your emotions to lead you, but you can rely on your intuition. And all intuition is your experienced knowledge. Right.
Your experiential knowledge.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so let's talk about the who benefits kind of.
Right. So there's one good thing to come out of this story. The one good thing to come out of this story. Oh, there's maybe a couple things.
Yeah. I mean, besides the obvious who benefits, right? The people who are benefiting from the exploitation, right? But then there's the sidebar of like, well, there's some good things that have come out of this.
Right. So some good things is that a couple of local venues, you know, were on in the New York Times. And so as a result of that, some small businesses in McKees Rocks may be getting a little bit of a boost as a result of that.
Right.
And so for that, I'm grateful.
Right.
And for that alone, you know, and also, you know, we live in McKees Rocks, and I would ask, you know, I would say, well, wait a minute, we live in McKees Rocks, and we're kind of media people. Why didn't the New York Times come to us and interview us? Because this is what the New York Times would get from us. Oh, Damar Hamlin didn't have a heart attack. He was used as a way to promote slush funds, racketeering, and fraud, which tend to circle like vultures around opportunity zones. And he was used for impact. His GoFundMe page was used for impact investors to continue to exploit this community of poverty that's already been exploited. Go ahead and print that, New York Times. You think they're going to print that? No. They're going to go to the local theater and they're going to, you know, do a feel-good story. And if it means that our friend who runs this local theater gets a little boost, then that's what benefits, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
You know, and so I want to really stress that the community of McKees Rocks, you know, while they're draped in blue and wearing number 3 and being very sentimental about their hometown hero, apparently, they are not the ones to be wagging your finger at. I'm not talking down to them. I'm not making fun of them. I'm not criticizing them for their sentimental reaction or response or connection to Damar Hamlin. Pittsburgh has very strong connections, so I'm not talking down to them.
No, that's one of the things we do admire about this area is the family ties and the social ties.
The social ties here are really strong. Yeah. Unfortunately, those social ties are being exploited for obscene profit, and that obscene profit comes at the expense of actual lives. And that's the part that I'm criticizing, and that's the part that really bothers me. And I have to stress that Damar Hamlin's story was never ever about the COVID shot. It was never ever about health or heart attacks. It was about exploitation of poor people by the billionaire class, and using this kid as a way to do that.
Yep. Okay. Well, thank you for listening to another Footnote. We're releasing this for free and early.
Right.
We normally put it out on every other Friday, but we're releasing this early because we felt like this was kind of important, because that video that we played at the beginning, the sound from that video was just released like just hours ago from the time that we're recording this. So we wanted to get this out there and share it with all of you before other pundits, you know, got their hands all over it.
Right. And you know what? And one last thing. If you want to donate to a foundation in Pittsburgh that's sports backed and sports related, then please, we'll include the link in the description of this video. Then go to Sean Gibson, because, go to his foundation, which is in the name of his great-grandfather.
Right, joshgibson.org.
joshgibson.org, the Josh Gibson Foundation. Because I got to tell you, Damar Hamlin's foundation is backed by the billionaire class, backed by the entire National Football League and various other. And I want to tell you the kind of people that are backing the Josh Gibson Foundation. A local grocery store. Now, it is a corporate grocery store, but he has to cobble
regional,
together.
right.
He cobbles together about a dozen different small businesses. Some are banks. I think even, maybe the ACLU gives a little bit of money towards his foundation every year, but he has to cobble together dozens of different,
and he does it himself. I mean,
and
he has
does
a
it
small
all by
staff
himself.
yeah.
And so this is the kind of thing that you want to focus on. You don't want to focus on exploitive foundations and impact investments. This is actually we believe that this is a legitimate foundation. We interviewed Sean Gibson. We've seen him at the grocery store.
Right.
He is the nicest guy you could ever meet. He has a heart of gold. He wanted to build this mixed-use facility, and it breaks my heart that he couldn't do it because of the exploitive processes of capitalism and not understanding what opportunity zones and impact investors really do.
Right.
Okay?
Yep.
So thank you for that.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks again for listening, and we will talk to you again another time on Footnote.
On Footnote. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.